and my stomach's going to start expanding. It's going to be really uncomfortable to the degree where I don't feel like I can eat, you
Wow.
know.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome to Pushing the Limits again. Fantastic to have you all with me. I have the lovely Dr. Janelle with me, Dr. Kathleen Janel. Welcome to the show. Fantastic to have you. Can't wait to share your story. So it's going to be a fascinating dive into the world of SIBO and IBS. So, Dr. Janelle, would you mind sharing us a little bit about your backstory and where you come from and what you do now? And then we'll sort of dive into the whole MSM story and all of the stuff that you do with SIBO and IBS.
Sure. Okay. I'll give you a brief pre-med school story. And that's that I was really studying to be a, regular medical doctor. And getting my undergraduate underway and setting myself up for that, applying to medical schools when I actually got really sick myself. And what I had was this digestive symptom, and that's something that people tell me about all the time now. And for me, what was happening is that I was just, blowing up like a balloon every
Mhm.
day. Had no idea why. It didn't matter if I didn't eat. It didn't matter if I just drank water. It didn't matter what I ate, it seemed. And I had exhausted. I was pre-med, actually, I was on my way to the University of Toronto in Canada and for medical school. And at that point, I had exhausted what it felt like to be all of my regular routes. I'd been to my family doctor, saw a couple of specialists. No one really could help me. And so my stepmother actually had recommended, well, why don't you go see this naturopath? And it was a big eye roll for me. I was like, I don't want to do that. But I really didn't have a lot of choices. So I did go see this doctor that she recommended, and I got a little bit of relief, right? At least I got some ideas about what I could eat and what I couldn't eat. And he sort of started me down the road. So I didn't get resolution, but I got some answers. And
Mhm.
then I got really interested about, what is this? And am I going to the right place to be able to help people if this is the kind of thing I'm going to help people with? So I started looking more into naturopathic medicine and saw there was a couple places to apply to. So I added those onto my applications
Mhm.
and ended up going that route. Well, during the course of that, of course, I learned a lot of different applications that I could use to help myself feel better. So I did all of those things. I did all of the different diets and this is back in the early 90s. So
Yeah.
things were a little different in the landscape there, but I did all of the diets, I did all of the herbs, I did all the nutrients, I did some pharmaceuticals, I did some homeopathics. I mean, really, what I remember happening was I'm being so optimistic, right? There's got to be an answer. I'm
Yeah.
not going to stop until, I get an answer. I knew it wasn't life-threatening, but it was so uncomfortable to live with,
Mm.
right? Because I knew that the clock's going to strike 12 o'clock and my stomach's going to start expanding. It's going to be really uncomfortable to the degree where I don't feel like I can eat, you
Wow.
know? And
Yeah.
so in addition to that, I was losing a lot of weight. I was really, really thin because I would come home at the end of the day and just hit the books and study because, maybe have a rice cracker because I couldn't put anything else in there. I was so full of gas. So we've got, now I'm getting down to a really low body weight. And of course, my adrenal glands are just shot at this point. So then I'm not sleeping. So all of these things start compounding
Yeah.
on each other coming from that GI problem. So the years go by and I'm, continuing to have this like, today's going to be the day,
Yeah.
like I'm just,
Very
what's
strong-minded.
right? I was like, there's got to be an answer. And that's just how I am, what's the
Cool.
next thing? What's the next thing? And so went through my residency, was still having the problem. Tried a couple other new things I learned along the way from some of the associate doctors that I was working with there who were also holistic, but still really no movement. And then a friend of mine said, you should talk to this compounding pharmacist. about methylsulfonomethane.
Hmm.
And I just thought, why? You know,
Why would that help? It seems
right,
counterintuitive,
exactly.
right?
Exactly, which is what a lot of people say to me, and
Mm-mm-mm.
I'm ready for my answer, right? But I can understand why they would say that because historically, we know methylsulfonomethane as an anti-inflammatory, as something that helps with osteoarthritis, with joints, muscle, that kind of stuff. And I've actually met doctors since I started lecturing who come to me and say, "Oh yeah, I do that, and I use a high dose as well, but I'm using it for this, and now I'm going to
Mm.
pay attention to what's happening in people's guts when I do this." So I talked to this compounding pharmacist who was local, and she was pretty business, pretty straightforward, like just, you can either trust me or you can go away kind of lady. So like, okay. Okay. So she told me what to do. And at that time, we couldn't get the quantities of methylsulfonomethane she was using a crystallized form. I now use a powdered form. It's easier to dissolve. But
Mm-mm.
at that time, it was only available really in mixtures with other anti-inflammatory joint support supplements. So you couldn't get the concentration that you needed. So she actually was supplying it to me and then supplying it to my clinic afterwards. And I went through the protocol that she said, gradually increase your dose, get up to a 30-gram dose, hold it there. She warned me of all of the things that could happen in terms of, die-off reactions and sulfur upregulation reactions in the beginning, and that reassurance that these are good signs,
Mm.
because it's not like you have a headache, you take an ibuprofen, it goes away, it worked, right? It's not
Yeah.
like that
No, no.
because you're actually doing a lot of internal changes that are beneficial, but they might have some side effects as you go through it. But the majority of people, those all go away once they've acclimated inside. So that day came. The day finally came, and it was so long ago now, I don't remember
Wow.
exactly where I was in the protocol. Was I doing the ramp up? Was I at the full dose? I don't know. But one morning I woke up and was preparing for the afternoon,
Pain of the, yeah.
right, all of the pain and all of the et cetera that comes along with it. And it didn't happen. And that was the first time in 10 years. It didn't happen.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
so you can't, I mean, I was so happy. I was so happy.
I just love your tenacity that you just kept going until you found something. That's a testament to, I love people like that because they do find answers eventually. And, I'm very much of the same ilk. Like there's got to be something around the corner that I just haven't heard of, I haven't learned yet. I'll just keep going until I find the answer. And more often than not, it might take a year or two or three or 10 in this case, but you have a lot more success that way. Plus you learn along the way a whole lot of other things, right? That forces you to learn a whole lot of stuff that then comes to the benefit of what you're doing. So methanol sulfonyl methane, we'll call it MSM. Um, this is, when I'm working with someone with SIBO or IBS or SIBO especially, like we see an upregulation of Methanobrevibacter smithii and Desolvo, what do you call it, Pyja. And these are methane or hydrogen producing bacteria. So it would seem counterintuitive that you would put more sulfur in a sulfur-based product into someone who's got a sulfur upregulation, the bacteria are upregulated. Can you explain that? Because that took me a while to get my head around as to why, because it does cause at the beginning more bloating, more things. As you said, you go through this Herxheimer reaction, this die-off of bad bacteria. What's actually happening in the body? Is the body trying to self upregulate these things to help itself, or what's going on there?
Yeah, so that's my working theory. But I can go into detail about those symptoms that come up and let you know what's happening. So the working theory right now is there is some degree of sulfur deficiency in the body,
Mhm.
and we don't store sulfur, right? Sulfur is always moving through in the different chemicals that contain sulfur, alpha lipoic acid, taurine, N-acetylcysteine, glutathione, methionine. So it's always moving through those sulfite. It's never stored, just like I think a good analogy is calcium, right?
Mm.
Calcium's another mineral and we store it in the bones. So when we need some, we don't have to like get it from our diet immediately. We can just liberate it from the bones, use it for whatever we need. If we have excess, we can put it back into bone storage. Sulfur's not like that. We need a daily intake of up to 1,500 milligrams a day
Wow.
for adequate sulfur cycles to be happening. And if they're not happening, it's not going to put you in the hospital tomorrow, but it's going to start to impact your system. So and this is not something that's been proven at this point, but there's a doctor named Stephanie Seneff who's out of MIT who's done a
Yeah.
lot of research on sulfur deficiency. And so I won't cross over into her area, but I base a lot of my theoretical information based on that. So let's just take the methylsulfonomethane and say, okay, we're going to ingest that. What is it doing once it gets inside of us? Well, it's not feeding the sulfite pathways. It's not feeding the hydrogen sulfide dominant species. It's not feeding the methanogens or the hydrogen producing species in terms of their ability to make gas. What it is doing at the low levels, and the studies have shown this, is that it's a prebiotic, right?
What's a prebiotic?
So yeah, so it's a prebiotic. So that's one of the reasons why people are getting gassier in the beginning at the lower levels, because it's regulating all the bacteria, including the fermentation species. And it's
Gotcha.
not exclusive to the small intestine. It's, wherever it reaches, right? You're going to get at lower doses, you're going to get more absorption in the smaller intestine. There's going to be less going through into the large. But as you increase the dose, then you're sweeping through the entire system and you're moving over from a prebiotic effect to an antimicrobial effect at the higher doses. And the studies do show that too. There's a great study that I've got that does the MSM against Candida, against
Mhm.
Aspergillus, which is a mold, against E. coli, which is one of the major ones that the antibiotic
Yeah.
rifaximin targets, right, or is
Mhm.
supposed to target. And then a couple other staph and can't remember, there's a fourth one, staph and strep maybe, but it's antimicrobial once you get up to those high doses over a sustained period of time.
Wow.
And I'm not sure how this compounding pharmacist, like, who is she? Where'd she go? I don't know. But I would just love to sit down with her at some point if she's still around. I can't find her and ask her how she knew this because these studies are more recent,
Yeah,
right?
so
So
yeah, yeah. So how the
yeah,
heck did she
that
know?
would be, I
And
could
very
find her.
intuitive.
Sure, there was something going on there. I'm not sure what dimension she was tapping into,
Wow.
but there was something going on where she figured this out. And no one's ever heard of it, apart from her and then me. And then I've been telling people. But back to what's going on inside your intestinal system. So we've got this prebiotic, low dose antibiotic or antimicrobial and antifungal at a high dose. Now, the reason it's not playing into the sulfur cycles in terms of any of the hydrogen sulfide producing species is because that requires taurine or
Uh-huh.
sulfate. And in order to convert methylsulfonomethane into either of those two has to be an internal reaction and it has to happen eventually, right? So those microbes in us, they can't do that. What can do that is, let me just go through this mentally.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, what can do that is we've got
Mhm.
some bacteria in us
Mhm.
that have the potential of converting sulfate into methionine, and then
Mhm.
methionine can feed into our sulfur cycles. But
Mhm.
that's not going to happen immediately for somebody. That's going to take some time. And it's actually, that's where you run into more of the problems internally for people when you're doing the titration with things like non-die-off related headaches, possibly rashes. I haven't seen that for a long time though. What are some of the other things? I mean, a lot of it's die-off, really, what you're seeing in the beginning, and that's yeast
Right.
die-off, you
And
know.
so, yeast die off. So, because, I'm
Mhm.
working with a patient at the moment and really bad SIBO, actually has really extreme glyphosate poisoning, which I want to touch on a little bit later. And one of the things he's getting is headaches, is a byproduct of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Huge improvements in the gut, but this headache, so that may be feeding into that pathway that's causing that. So that's likely to be a transient thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And, just go slowly. Don't do titration increases until you've got a symptom resolution of any kind of side effect like that. And then you go up by small amounts and expect that to decrease each time you take another jump. And then when you get up to the full dose, all those things seem to go away because now the body is like upregulated those sulfur cycles. So
Hmm.
now it can move the sulfite to the sulfate and use it for all of the good things that sulfate does. I mean, there's literally um, such a myriad of things that we're
Yeah,
discovering
let's
all
go
the
through
time.
some of those, like because it is very beneficial not only for people with SIBO and IBS and gut issues, but also for the joints, for the hair, for the skin, the nails, the strengthening of the tissues, all of these benefits. And when you say it's playing into that whole sulfur cycle, so is it upregulating sort of endogenous, like your glutathione pathways? Do you need to take into consideration um, any sort of genetic things like the CBS pathway or the methyl, if someone's got MTHFR issues or methylation issues, are there any sort of warning things there? Or it's a pretty tricky question, I know.
No, no, I've been down
I'm in
this
the
road
weeds.
before. So
Sorry.
it's fine. What happens for me is that on one of my, social platforms like YouTube or Insta or something, someone will come and ask me a question, and if I don't know the answer, I'm like, drop everything. I gotta figure this
Gotta go
out.
look at that.
I gotta figure it out. I gotta get to the bottom of this. So, and not just because I know the question's going to come up again and I want to have an intelligent answer, but I really want to know, what's
Mhm,
happening. So here's the thing about our sulfur cycles. They start with methionine, right?
mhm,
Methionine is amino acid. We get that primarily from protein. Right.
mhm,
So methionine is the start part of that whole cycle that you're talking about, which is the methylation cycle.
mhm,
And that methylation cycle spins around and makes homocysteine.
mhm,
And that homocysteine then goes into this transsulfuration cycles. And that's when you're talking about glutathione and sulfate and all of that, cysteine
mhm,
and acetylcysteine. So methionine is an essential amino acid, right? So we can take any of those compounds and we're never, ever, ever going to make it because we can't. It has to be taken in dietarily. And so, where we're seeing any kind of conversion of, because what they've done is they've done studies where they'll tag the MSM and they'll give it to usually, some kind of test animal.
mhm.
And then they'll find out, okay, can we find this later on in the body as any of those proteins?
Right.
And we can, eventually we can. So how
Right.
is it, then
So
that's the
good.
big question, right? How
Yeah.
is it getting into that cycle? So far the working theory, and again, hasn't been 100% proven, but there's some data out there that some of our microbes in the gut can convert it to methionine and then feed it into our bodies directly that way. And that's where we're getting that methylsulfonomethane tagged base sulfur so that we can use it then in those cycles. So, in terms
Mm.
of being concerned about single nucleotide polymorphisms or SNPs, um, I've never,
It should help, really.
yeah,
I think.
it depends on what they are and whether they're upregulating or down regulating, right? So, the main one is going to be the sulfite oxidase.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
So if someone has a SNP that's greatly impacting the sulfite oxidase and the ability to move sulfite, right, which is kind of like, sulfite and histamine are very similar in the sense that people have allergic reactions to those
Yeah, I
to
do.
varying
Yeah.
degrees,
Mm.
right? And so if you're not moving sulfite into sulfate in a healthy way, then yes, you can have some buildup of sulfate. Now, the real problems are not SNPs, but this kind of gets taken care of on its own because unfortunately, anyone who has a sulfate oxidase enzyme that's impacted to the degree that they can't tolerate sulfur, they don't leave the hospital, right? They can't survive. And those actually exist. That happens. But
Wow.
obviously not people who made it to adult life, right?
Yeah, so this is a genetic thing that comes through in childhood that you wouldn't make it out of childhood if you had that problem, so you'd know.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Correct. So that's a very serious genetic defect.
yeah.
And when we're talking about single nucleotide polymorphisms, that's not a genetic defect that's going to interrupt the pathways that we're looking at to the degree that it's going to cause fatalities or to the degree that it's going to cause something that's irrevocable. You can't work with it. So one of the ways you can work with it is making sure there's enough molybdenum
Yes, I was
because
going to ask you
that's
about molybdenum because
Mhm.
that helps with if you're taking sulfur, always pair it with molybdenum, usually is the thing
Yeah,
in order to
it's a
help your body
cofactor.
process. Yeah, yep, get that
It's
through.
a cofactor.
Are there any other
Mhm.
cofactors that suggest to work alongside when you're taking MSM in these higher doses? I mean, I've got a sulfite issue. So like if I have dried fruit or something that's been, had sulfite in it because they use it to preserve, I know immediately my throat shuts down and I can't breathe and, I get sort of like an asthma type of effect. But I don't have any issues with the MSM at all, or garlic or onions or any of those sorts of things. Now, here's a question for you, because a lot of people with SIBO are told to go do the FODMAP diet, which is, going low in the sulfur producing vegetables and, other things as well. It would seem contrary to what we're doing with MSM. Can you do the FODMAP diet alongside MSM, or should they be done at separate times? What is the correct thing there?
I've got two approaches to that. So if someone comes to me and they're on a low FODMAP diet and they're kind of used to it and they
Hmm.
understand it, I want to keep things as simple as possible for them and isolate their sulfur to, my product is called the GI1 powder, and that's available in the US, but
Yeah,
you can use plain MSM in other countries until we can get it over there.
yeah, we could
But
talk
I'll
about
have
that.
them,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I'll have them exclusively use the methylsulfonomethane and keep those low FODMAP foods out. And I'm doing that intentionally because it just there's less moving parts,
yeah.
right? So that we can say, okay, this is what we're working on right now. Stay on your low FODMAP diet, and at the end of the 8 weeks of your full dose of the GI1 powder, when you're feeling better, then we're going to use those low FODMAP foods as prebiotics and introduce them gradually. Because if you sit down and eat a head of cabbage after you're feeling better, anybody
You're going to have
anybody
trouble.
would, yeah, they would. So what you want to do is you want to actually use those high fiber foods as prebiotics to re-educate your microbiome and create a bigger alpha diversity, because people that have been on these low FODMAP diets for years, their alpha diversity is low.
Okay, yeah, no, you definitely
Low.
don't want to stay out on it long term, because it's
No,
blocking out so
no.
many good foods.
They don't, and they don't want to stay on it. Some people don't feel like they have a choice because it's the only thing that makes them feel better,
Yeah,
but it's not really treating the problem. It's
no.
just helping the symptoms. So that's one avenue. You're on the low FODMAP diet already, just stay on it. We'll deal with that in the end, and we'll use the low FODMAP foods gradually as prebiotics to get you alpha diversity. The other one are people that come in and they're not on the low FODMAP diet. It depends, I would say.
Mhm.
Like some people know, oh, I have a problem with the allium family foods, garlic and onions, or I have a family problem with the cruciferous family foods. Oh, but if they're cooked, I can eat them. What I tell people then is just do what you're doing,
Yeah.
whatever is working for you, do what you're doing. And then there's the contingent of people who were like me, who, you know what, it doesn't matter what I eat, it doesn't matter what I don't eat. I can be dairy free, I can be gluten free, I can eat, eat sugar, not eat sugar, all of those things. I'm still having my symptoms. And for those people, I just don't even change their diet at all because, well, at this point, a lot of people I'm seeing have had many, many courses of rifaximin,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
right?
another problem, right?
Yeah, and that's just really clouded the picture up. And now they've likely have yeast fermenting on top of bacterial fermenting, right? And
Yeah.
yeast yeast and fungal, the fungal kingdom, they're probably going to be the last ones living on this earth, right?
Mm.
Because they're so adaptable. They're so, if you stop eating carbohydrates, they'll switch to fats. If you stop eating fats, they'll switch to proteins.
Right.
They will use whatever, even if you're not eating anything, they can eat the shedding off of the wall of the intestine, right? Like we're always shedding every 4 days, we get a new intestinal lining.
Yeah.
They can eat that, so they'll find a way.
Little bastards.
Yeah, they really are hard to get rid of. And, you know, um, the the methylsulfonaphane is a treatment that works for fungal species as well.
Wow,
Um,
that's so cool.
but
Because yeah, I didn't know
yeah,
like the E. coli. Like my mum's had massive gastrointestinal problems, diverticulitis, gastrointestinal bleeding, when she nearly died. It was about a year and a half ago. Massive blood, just bleeding, and then sepsis and UTI infections. So I'm always looking for answers to help with the UTIs, to help because she's had antibiotics over and over again, and we're using methylene blue now, which seems to be holding the UTIs at bay, touch wood, for a longest time now. But the yeast overgrowth, the fungal overgrowths, because of the repeated rounds of antibiotics, which at that point I didn't have a choice. She was dying of sepsis. So,
mhm.
like, what are you going to do? You're going to chuck everything in there, right? Um, would they, you mentioned E. coli, that it could actually help with E. coli because that's one of the nasties what we've had problems with.
Mhm.
So, I've titrated mum's dose up now to she's on about 20 grams of the MSM. I'm still titrating her up, and so far really good. No problems at all. But I didn't realize it could actually help with that side of the equation as well. So that's really
Yeah, I mean, I
yeah,
think that's the first thing that we knew about sulfur. It's been used in farming as an antifungal,
yeah,
right? And it's the only one that can be used in organic farming
yeah.
at this point. I want to touch on something you said about
Mhm.
antibiotics, and that's that I'm not anti-antibiotics,
No, we
just
need them when we need them, but they're not
yeah,
good.
there's a
So yeah,
there's
we're
a
gonna
time and a place. Yeah,
absolutely.
there's a time and a place.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because recently one thing I've been looking into is specifically around Xifaxan, rifaximin, the SIBO antibiotic. It's not approved for SIBO.
Mm. Wow.
It's approved for hepatic encephalopathy was where it started, right?
Hmm.
Now, those people don't have a choice, right? They've got a problem with their liver and they can't process the chemicals that E. coli is making in their gut. It will damage their brain, and so that's fatal, right? So
Yeah.
these have to stay on rifaximin long term.
Wow.
So that's one category, and that's where this whole thing started, right? And then someone had the idea, well, let's test it for traveler's diarrhea, which is E. coli based typically.
Mm.
And that was the link, right? It's like, well, this works for E. coli, let's test it for this. It's a one and done though, right? It's either going to work or it isn't. You don't go back.
Right.
And then the next thing that came along was, okay, how about irritable bowel syndrome D, IBS-D, diarrhea?
Hmm. Hmm.
It's got a 50% recovery rate for that. And that also makes sense too, because that could also be E. coli based. So now you've got these three things. Two of them are diarrhea conditions, right? And 50% of the time it works. So this is the standard of care, right? This is what you'll find if you read
Mm.
the recommendations. You do one round and you get 50% resolution. Those people are done. They're happy unless they travel again and have a problem. You can repeat it. Otherwise, you don't repeat it. So this repeating the course after course after course for SIBO, first of all, it's not even designated for that treatment. And the place where I run into problems is I can say, okay, if you see a patient who has like this crossover of IBS-D and SIBO, which happens, and
Mm.
you give them a round of Xifaxan and it works, rifaximin and it works, then great, you treated what you were after. If it doesn't, I don't think it's arguable to go back in there and treat again with it. And that's what I see is people that have had, I've seen people that have had up to 8 rounds of Xifaxan. And what happens is that they get, reach a roadblock or endpoint with a certain provider, and then they go to another provider who's going to offer them the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they'll take it, right? Because they are desperate to get better and they'll
Yeah.
take it. And it seems to work less and less as you
Mm,
go along. And that also doesn't make sense to me because antibiotics are very targeted and they're very strong. It's either going to work or not,
mm, yeah,
right? And if it doesn't work, then start looking for some other avenues because
exactly.
especially people who have been trained in functional medicine and in naturopathic medicine, I think once is enough.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And taking other approaches. What are your takes? I was going to ask you, oh God, what was it? I did want to go back to glyphosate because
Hmm.
glyphosate is everywhere. Everybody's on the planet pretty much impacted to some degree. We use it on our crops. They use it, as a weed killer, but is this part of the problem that we're seeing? Do you think that glyphosate is affecting people's gut microbiome, and how does that work if that's the case? And how would MSM help in that case?
Oh goodness, yes. So, but two different questions there.
Yeah.
One is, let's do this. How does it affect the gut microbiome? So what the glyphosate does for your listeners, glyphosate is called Roundup here. It might be
Yeah,
called Roundup.
same. Yep.
Okay. So what glyphosate does is it blocks something called the shikimate pathway. And humans don't have the shikimate pathway. So that's the argument for, okay, it's safe for humans. But most microbes do have the shikimate pathway, right? So let's say you want to grow a corn crop. Corn is one of the first ones that were made
Yeah.
Roundup ready, right?
Yeah.
Roundup ready means that they've made it so you can't kill the corn. 'Cause the corn has this shikimate pathway too, but they've genetically modified the crop they want so it can't be killed, but everything else around it can be, including the soil microbiome,
Uh,
right?
uh,
So the soil microbiome, and what I've found is that the specific bacteria that fix sulfur in order for the plant to use it, right? Plants can only uptake sulfate, and the microbiome in the soil will convert the form of sulfur that arrives in the rain and goes into the soil. And then, this is the part of the ecosystem, the sulfur cycle of the globe, right? That these microbiome will convert it to sulfate so this plant can use it. Well, they're greatly impacted by glyphosate. And so if they're being killed, then that's a deficit to the sulfur content of our plant species. And then let's go into that. So that's the soil microbiome is impacted, limiting sulfur in our diets. And then we go to the human microbiome. 50% of the human microbiome has the shikimate pathway. That means that we're killing
the
that. So for the
bacteria
people
do. Yeah, the
right.
bacteria.
And
Yeah.
yeah, that's going to free up real estate inside. And with microbes, right, something has to be there, right?
Yeah,
Like
it'll
even on our
fill the gap.
skin, it'll fill the gap. It
Yeah.
has to. That's just the way ecosystems work. And a healthy ecosystem has the greatest diversity, right? An unhealthy ecosystem is a monocrop, like the corn we're talking about.
Yeah.
So obviously unhealthy ecosystem for many reasons. So now if you go in there and you kill 50% of the microbiome by ingesting glyphosate on the foods, then that's a automatic
Massive
setup
loss.
for
Yeah.
small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, right?
Yeah.
Automatically because you've freed up that real estate so something else can be there. So yeah, it's not good for our microbiome. And
And then
I
you
think
have a deficiency in sulfur as well, which leads to all the other problems that we've just talked about. Sulfur deficiency being
exactly,
the third most, yeah. Um,
exactly. So that's
yeah.
why, the Monsanto, who's the company that developed and markets Roundup, is getting their data, most of when I looked for soil studies, most of the data was coming from them. And the spin was, oh, but the bacteria are cleaning it up, right? But those bacteria in the soil are being sacrificed in that cleanup process,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I think we're kind of, I mean, who knows? I'm not sure where things are at right now, but there's definitely some countries that
In
won't
some
allow
countries.
these.
That's why I think, like in Europe, there's a lot more stricter rules around glyphosate, I believe. And people say, look, they can't have flour, they can't have bread, they can't have pasta in America or in New Zealand. But when they go to Europe, they do okay when they have Italian pasta or Italian bread or German bread because it's not got these high levels of glyphosate over there in this problem. That's a hypothesis that that's why. And like I've just signed a petition here. Our government is trying to increase the level of allowed glyphosate. And I'm just horrified. Like we've already got an epidemic of people that have so many troubles with the gut. And the gut, I mean, I have a biotech company, Avum Labs, and we work on the immune system and the aging of the immune system and trying to reverse that. And we've got an amazing formulation called Rejuvenate Pro, and it's going after the healing and sealing of the gut, which MSM also helps with the leaky gut sort of side of the story. And we're using extract of colostrum, which is really, really powerful, much more powerful than your standard colostral extract because it's taken all the rest of the things out and left the bioactives. And then we've got something called immune defense proteins, which has got a suite of 50 bioactives that is produced by the cow in the whey side of it, so not the colostrum, but the whey side. And that was made by nature to protect the cow, and it contains like 40% lactoferrin. And lactoferrin is sort of one of the key players here. And lactoferrin is just one of the most marvelous things on the planet. And so this is a much more it's embedded in a suite of 50 bioactive whey proteins, and it's the synergy of these 50 together that makes it super powerful. And you put it with the immunel, our colostrum whey extract, and you've got all these transfer factors, immunoglobulins, your leaky gut, your growth factors, IGF-1, all of these things helping. And then we've also paired it with kawakawa, which is a native of New Zealand plant here that's been used for hundreds of years by my people for gastrointestinal issues, for pain, down regulates COX-2. It does, lowers NF-kappa B and TNF-alpha and all these things that, great things that it does. And then the last thing we have in there is canosic acid, which really helps with a chemokine called CXCL9, which is one of the ones that they've identified recently as being a really key player in cardiovascular health. But also for neuroprotection, we use the canosic acid and for the gut health as well. So a really powerful formula. And like we're never going to run out of patients, unfortunately, that need gut support. And I love your formulations. Like you've got the GI so on gijanel.com, which is where I highly recommend everybody go and visit Dr. Janel's website and have a look at the product lineup that you have, especially if you're in the States, because you can get it, but maybe we can chat offline of possibilities of getting it down here. In the GI Janel 1, you've got MSM as your major component, but you've also paired it with slippery elm and acacia gum, and what was the other one?
Marshmallow
Sorry?
root.
Yes,
Marshmallow.
marshmallow root. Thank you. Yeah. Why those other pieces of that puzzle, and how do they work sort of synergistically in that combination?
Yeah, I did it so that the sensitive patients could start to get a little bit of all of these things while they're doing their titration in the powder. The acacia, primarily because it's a non-fermentable, fructooligosaccharide, non-fermentable fiber, soluble fiber. So it's very gentle. So that way we're introducing some prebiotics gradually. So as people go up in their dose, they're getting more of that as well as the methylphenolmethane. And then with the, because I want the body to get used to having some stronger forms of prebiotics going in there. that then we can take over using the foods with once they're completed with their course. So that's the acacia fibers. And then with the both with the althea and the almus, which are marshmallow and slippery elm, they're just so great for the mucus lining of the
Yes.
gut,
Mm.
right? Like if you took those plants and you soak them in water, what you're going to get is this really lovely gooey gel stuff,
Yep.
right? And so that's coating and it's soothing. And every once in a while, you'll run into somebody who can't take that, but it's pretty rare, right?
Yep.
I don't think I've seen anyone in the last 5 years who says, I react to that. So it's a benign formulation to use because I'm really focused on the repair aspect as people are going through this antimicrobial and antifungal part of the treatment. So I just want
Mm.
it to be soothing. And then one of the other things I have on there is a really high dose mucopolysaccharide aloe. So what they've done with this particular aloe is they've concentrated the mucopolysaccharides. So literally one of those little pills is like, eating a whole entire aloe plant,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
So with the aloe plant, because plant medicine, which is kind of where I started out was in plant medicine, and then sort of moved from there. I had a really amazing teacher who just recently passed, but she was one of our, herbal medicine leaders in this country, and she taught me a lot about it. But with plant medicine and aloe, if you're using the outside leaf of the aloe, the dark
Yes.
green part,
Yep.
that's a laxative, right?
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
laxative. So careful. Don't just go munching on your aloe plant. But if you're using the inner fillet, that's the gel part, right? That's the healing part. And, I think it's good to understand that the same cells, like when we start out as a little ball, right? A little zygote, a bunch of cells, the same cells that line the inner surface of our body line the outer surface of our body, right? So things kind of they kind of dip in and make this tube, and then the tube becomes our digestive tract. But those are
Wow.
the same progenitor cells,
Yep.
right? And those cells are called either ectoderm or endoderm.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but the only difference between the skin and the digestive tube is the thickness of the cells, right? In the small intestine, one cell layer thick, which is also why you need to have a good immune system because your food is
Exactly.
not sterile, right?
Exactly.
And in the skin, you've got many layers of thickness, plus it's waterproof. And that's really the only difference. So if you put
Wow.
some aloe on a cut or a scratch or something, and you can almost watch it heal, it just
Yeah.
really expedites that. We call it a vulnerary effect in herbal medicine. Same thing happens inside.
Wow.
So I love aloe for that reason.
I actually interviewed, put on your radio, may not have heard of him, but Dr. John Lewis, and he has allopolysaccharide as a supplement that he's produced, but he's done lots and lots of clinical research. You might enjoy reading some of his
Mm.
research. I can send you the link to the podcast and some information on him. And I have his product. I import it from the States down here because it's so powerful for brain healing. Okay, it's a super powerful. I mean, it's for gut as well. And whatever helps the gut usually helps the brain anyway. It's a two-way street. But you might be interested in his research on Alzheimer's and that type of thing as well. The allopolysaccharides that he's using, I'm not sure if it's the same type or the same species or whatever, but absolutely phenomenal results. And also for things like sepsis and stuff, he's using it. So I use those in high doses of my mum. Take it myself as well, and have great benefit from it. So yeah, I think allopolysaccharides are a very interesting thing. It'll be interesting to see if the one that you're using and how it's made is similar to what he's doing. So yeah, Dr. John Lewis, remind me, I'll send you the podcast over. I did have one question that popped up in my head too about secretory IgA, because we were talking about the immune system and the gut. Does the to your knowledge, does the MSM or your combination there and the GI1, Janel 1, does that help with the secretory IgA and the mucus layers? Like, is it going to improve that, or if you've got low SIgA?
think indirectly, right? So there's this structural component that it eventually helps with once we've got our sulfur cycles upregulated, and we can then make heparan sulfate, which is one of the offshoots of those cycles we were talking about, and that's what holds our collagen together. And that's what forms our connective tissue, right? So if you've got stronger connective tissue in the gut, both the cell-to-cell connections and the basement membrane, then you've got a stronger system. So that's the structural component of it, but also as an anti-inflammatory and an immune upregulation. So there's lots of, you just named off a bunch of like tumor necrosis factor and alpha, kappa,
Yeah,
beta,
all of those.
all of those things, right? So no need to confuse people with that, but let's
No.
just say there's a group of immunomodulators that we're familiar with, and definitely sulfur is a big piece of upregulating their capacity. So I can't speak to that like directly, but definitely indirectly that can happen. And remember, we need that secretory IgA to protect us,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if you run a lab on somebody and you notice that their gut secretory IgA is up, that's a clue. That's telling you, okay, there's something the body does not like that it's being exposed to here.
Mhm.
Let's figure out, is it food? Is it an overgrowth?
And if it's low, which is often the case, what's so
Yeah, then you've got more work to do. If it's low,
yeah,
then you've got a compromised immune system, probably from that original GI problem or from some other co-infection that's going on, or both.
yeah, yeah. And this can be chronic, like I've worked with a couple of celiac patients that have just, don't seem to be able to get their secretory IgA up. It's just staying low. Now we're trying our formulation with Rejuvenate Pro, and we'll see what happens with that. Because has been shown to help with secretory IgA, so we're hopeful. But we're getting into the weeds here a little bit, am I? Dr. Janelle, so you've also got other products in your lineup. So for the people that are listening from the States, they can go to your site and they can have a look at the different ones that you've got. You've got the GI one, which is the one we've just been talking about. But just talk us briefly through the digest other ones that you have as well, and why.
Yes, I've got three levels of digestive enzyme support, or digestive, let's broaden that out, not just enzymes, but digestive support. So digestive happens, initiates in the stomach, right? And that's your hydrochloric acid, um, and peptin. That's the start of digestion. And that's digestion of proteins, right? So that's what it's specifically for. So if someone says, I really can't digest protein very well, then they're telling you that they need more of that hydrochloric acid.
Yeah.
But I would caution you, and so this is like 30 years of practice. If you start someone on a betaine supplement, make sure you tell them up front, this is not forever, because you might see them 20 years later and they've got gastritis because they never went off of it, you know?
Right, so there's too much of
So
a good thing. Yeah, and you can
sure,
burn a
yeah,
hole. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely. So I use that, but I use it sparingly and with a time limit, right? And I
Right,
make sure I
even
do.
because when you're older, you produce less betaine, don't you? You're like from the get-go, as we age, we produce less. So, do you think there's an argument to keep it going at a lower level, sort of support to make sure that you are breaking
Yeah.
your proteins down?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the gastric cells atrophy, right? So you're going to produce less of everything. I mean, aging is, we don't live
Nasty.
forever, right? There's wear and tear as we go along. So, yeah, there's an argument for keeping low levels for geriatric patients for sure. But if there's any kind of, burning sensation or discomfort, I stop it right away because that's telling me gastritis, unless I have those scopes in front of me or imaging in front of me, and I know that that's a problem. I'm not going to touch that with those patients until they're better if they need it. So that's the initiation of digestion. That's a very, very low pH. The pH of the stomach, when proteins hit and the acid is secreted, is equivalent to battery acid. It's a
Oh,
pH of
yes.
1 or 2.
Oh,
It's really,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, so like that's also fascinating. Think about the protection we have to have in our gut so we're not auto-digesting our own body.
yeah.
And you can see why peptic ulcers occur, etc. So that mucus lining is incredibly important and powerful in the stomach, all the way through really, but in the stomach, for that reason. And then as soon as the food leaves the stomach, there's a valve that leaves the stomach, it enters the small intestine. Now in the small intestine's job, and it's sectioned off on either end, 25 feet long, its job is 100% digestion, which is breaking down and absorption of nutrients, right? So by the time your food reaches the valve that leads into the large intestine, all the nutrients are extracted, the food is all broken down. That's what's happening in there. It's pretty amazing. So, in the small intestine is where a tube comes from the pancreas and dumps in the digestive enzymes. So that's another thing that I'm supporting with my
Yeah.
supplements is digestive enzymes. And, there's kind of a movement that's happening. I'm hearing rumbles about it, because recently a drug company has come out with a pancreatic enzyme support.
Oh,
Right. And so that's something that people can get as a prescription now. But literally, digestive enzymes are
do we need that? Do we
they
need
yeah,
that?
they've been around for a while,
Yeah, we
right? And
don't need like amylase and lipase and all the ases and TUDCA and oxwald things like
yeah,
that should be
yeah,
sufficient.
it's definitely more limited, this prescription version, but you people are going to do what they're going to do. But basically, the one I use is a plant-based version of digestive enzymes. And I like that for children because
Hmm.
children don't necessarily need any increased acidity. So they don't really need the betaine portion. And that's to support people who we know they have problems with the pancreatic enzymes. But it doesn't end there because the pancreas secretes enzymes that will break down our three macromolecules, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, until they get to for the proteins and the carbohydrates, they'll get to a two form by the time they reach the small intestine and they're waiting to be transported over. They'll be in a disaccharide or a dipeptide form, right? Pancreas hasn't helped break them down 100%. Now, if you have a leaky gut, that double peptide can leak across and cause
Yeah,
problems, right? Because the
yeah,
immune
yeah,
system goes, what's this?
yeah.
Foreign protein, right? That's
Attack.
where you get problems.
Yeah.
And in the brush border of the small intestine, that's where you release the dipeptidases and the disaccharidases. Those are going to do the final absorb or the final breakdown. So now you
Mm.
can transport through the proper way, transport through those monosaccharides, monopeptides, right? So
Wow.
if you do a digestive enzyme, you want to have it have those in there as well.
Wow. And your one is that lovely blend of all of those together,
Mhm.
which you don't find in your standard sort of digestive
Yeah, a
enzyme
lot of them are
supplement.
focused more on the pancreatic aspect, but I find
Yes.
that especially with people who have digestive issues, they need all of that and until
Mm.
their digestion has healed and they're
Yeah.
stronger and they can make their own. There's certain genetic predispositions to like a lactase deficiency, right? Can't break down
Yes.
lactase. So
Absolutely.
that's something that's pretty well known.
Yep.
And
And so
should we be
theoretically, like, if you took your supplement with all of those bits and pieces in it, all of those enzymes, you might be able to tolerate some dairy or tolerate some lactose or whatever food. I mean, if you get your gut right, you should be able to eat most foods again.
Yeah, exactly. That's my goal. And that's one of the impetus. I mean, I think my big, marching orders are get people to stop using antibiotics as
Yeah,
much as they are.
as
And the
possible.
second one is expand the diet. Let's get people
Yes,
back into more of a whole foods diet because like let's go back to aloe, right? There's nature sitting there growing this stuff for us that's basically medicine, and our food can be medicine for us.
amen.
Um, so it's right there in front of us to use. But we don't necessarily, I kind of lost my train of thought there. I was like, oh, the whole foods
Mm.
diet, right?
Yeah,
So
diversity.
yeah, and if as, a holistic practitioner, if we're restricting diets down as a solution, as a long-term solution for people, I think we're creating other problems.
I agree. I agree totally. I think there's a time and a place for certain things when you want to be cutting out when you're in the extreme phase or you're doing something specifically. And when you cut out massive food groups for long periods of time, you're going to run into troubles down the track. with deficiencies and other problems. I had Dr. Ross Pelton on my show, and he's a wonderful, he calls himself a natural pharmacist, and he talks about, the diversity and the importance of not just because when we go to our supermarkets, at least here in New Zealand, we've got the same old broccoli and cabbage, and we've only got, a dozen different vegetables. We don't have the hundreds that we used to have when we were hunter-gatherer people that had a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it was all seasonal, and we'd have changes throughout the year of what we were eating. Now we're eating the same broccoli, the same, the same thing every day, and then you get your favorites, right? So you tend to eat the same thing, and then the broccoli may be really good for you, but it's not, you need the diversity. So he talks about like trying to have like 24 different vegetables and fruits a day, like a little bit of parsley and a little bit of marjoram and a bit of this herb and a bit of that veggie, and like trying to mix it up because you're feeding an army of 1 trillion down there, different microbes that need different things, and so you don't want to skew it in one direction, even if it's a good thing. You want to
Yeah.
have that diversity there, and he aims for 6 to 9 cups of vegetables a day, which is like pretty out there for most of us, to try to achieve that. But I always have that in my brain as the goal, and if you do that from the get-go, you're probably, like you say, you're going to have gas and you're going to have bloating as your body has to change. But as soon as we start eating more diversity, our microbiome is changing on the daily. So we can adapt. So sometimes you will have an initial reaction and start things change, but don't necessarily give up at that point. And the same with the MSM. And just coming back to the MSM story. So can you walk us through titrating up? What would be a sort of a good sort of idea of a protocol, and obviously work with your practitioner ideally, but for people that are wanting to try MSM, where should they start as a starting dose, and where should they escalate to?
At this point, I have three different protocols, depending on who I'm talking to. So if I have a hyper, and I've made videos of this, these are on my YouTube channel and on my
Yeah, go to
website.
the YouTube. Yeah, I'll put links. Yep.
Yeah, so three different channels. Let's start with a very, very sensitive patient. So the person who just is reacting to everything. Maybe they've had several doses of antibiotics, and then that's adding to it, and they have a very, very limited group of foods they can eat, like people who are eating only, super clean animal protein and some really well cooked vegetables. And that's pretty much all they're doing. And if they stray from that, they're not feeling good. They're getting GI symptoms. So for those people, I'm going to start them with a pinch dose. I'm going to have them just take a pinch of the GI1 powder, put it in some water or juice, and drink that every day and just gradually build themselves up. And the person that I did with that took the longest it took her 2 years, but she
Wow.
did eventually get rid of her symptoms,
Wow.
and so we just kind of, met every month or every couple of months and talked about how it was going and then just kept on encouraging her. So it worked, but it took a long time. So that's your very sensitive patient. And then I've got a moderate sensitive patient where I'll do pinch doses until you reach a quarter of a teaspoon. And then what they'll do is try and jump up another quarter from there, try and go to a
Mhm.
half. If that doesn't work, go back to the quarter plus a pinch and keep on doing that. Eventually, there's a time where everything falls into line. You're no longer having die-off reactions. You're no longer using it as a prebiotic to make you a little more gassy, and you're no longer having sulfur cycle upregulation reactions. Almost 100% of the time, people tell me this, and I kind of, been managed people all over the country at this point, and internationally as well. But the people who they're like, I'm having the headaches, or I feel, more stimulation from this. I think it's actually the intact MSM itself that's doing that, not one of the SNPs or pathways. And so when the body is able to process and acclimate to that, it just all goes away. Like suddenly it all goes away. So
Wow.
that, a lot of encouragement for people, and providing hope. And then the strong patient, I had one guy, this guy was, I think it was like 30 years into the bloating symptom. and he lived in Washington State. So we have a school here. So we have a ton of practitioners. So he'd done every diet under the sun. He'd done every treatment under the sun, biofilm busters and antiquorum sensing, antimicrobials, antibiotics, everything. He'd done it all. And nothing ever changed his symptom. I was like, you know who that sounds like? Sounds like me.
Mm.
Um, so he wanted to go in guns blazing. He was like, I told him to do a titration. He's like, I'm doing the full dose tomorrow. I was like, listen,
Good
I'm
for
not going
me.
to come. A, I'm not going to come and rescue you. And B, you're your own person. You do what you want to do. So he did. And I said, let's talk in 4 weeks. So he told me that around week 3, he didn't actually tolerate it really well, luckily, but I had prepped him for it. And he said about 3 weeks in, like for the first time, his symptoms were gone, first time in
Wow.
30 years.
Wow.
And he kind of gave me a talking to too. He was like, well, why are you the only person doing this? And I was like, you know what? You're right. I
Yeah,
better start talking about this.
better.
And before I retire from practice, I better start getting the word out. And, especially being in a high concentration of naturopaths practicing areas, like, please start at least considering this as a treatment option for your patients because nothing is 100%.
No,
But
not
I'd say at
everybody,
this,
but worth a try,
yeah,
isn't
I'd say
it?
at this point, I used to say 80%, but now it's more like 90 just because my practice is so focused on GI that, when I do a follow-up visit with my patients, I'm expecting to hear things are better.
Wow, and that's gold, isn't it? And I think it's just absolutely really important the work that you're doing and now getting out on podcasts, having your own YouTube channel and writing books. You've written a book as
Mhm.
well. Send me all those links, or I'll link them all down below. Because you can help people worldwide, and it's a simple, easy thing to do, whether they're working with your products, which would be gold if you're in America, and maybe we can talk about getting them down here, or if you're just trying the MSM yourself, this could be saving so many people from so much suffering for so many years. I mean, it's really gold that you're really getting out there and talking about it, because I think that's just, we've got to share the gems that we do find along the way and share them freely with people, really, so that they can get that. And that's what this podcast is all about. So, Dr. Janelle, I just wanted to wrap up and say thank you very, very much for your wisdom and your experience. And obviously, you were meant to have that horrible time back in med school, but so that you could share all this wisdom with the world, and for continuing, your incredible dedication to learning it all that you have done and putting these great supplements together. So, tell us where people can find you. What can people work with you one-on-one if they wanted to? Where we find your book and all of that sort of good stuff.
Yes, I think the easiest place is if you go to gijanelle.com, everything is linked from there, right? So we have an application for consultations page that gets managed by my admin. So if people are appropriate, then I'll do a one-on-one consultation with them and see them through things. But I'm focused on the GI stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, after 30 years, you know a lot about a lot. And some things you don't know a lot about, but you know a lot about a lot. But I try and keep it focused to the GI and then send people off to other experts,
I love
if we
that. Yeah,
verge over to something else. The supplements are there and we can ship out anywhere in the US. Like I said, we can actually, we do have an ability to ship to a doctor who's able to get things into Canada. So that's another option for Canadians. And a lot of those people up there have been, learned this protocol and are using it, which is wonderful. And then if people have PO boxes in the US, then we can ship to them as well, right? Ship to a PO box and then they can have it sent forward from there.
right.
Um,
Okay, so
and
there's
that, and my
many
book is
options.
available on that, as well as I've done so many videos because what I realized over the course of like opening a YouTube channel and stuff is that this is my passion, that when somebody asks me a question, like I said earlier, and I don't know the answer, I will would literally drop everything and go into a biochemistry vortex and looking at studies and comparing things and, looking at who did it and who funded it I just love it. I love it. So I've got a ton of videos up there. And in terms of general questions, when people ask me questions, I'm happy to help them out. If they need like dosing things or something more specific, then they'll have to either, go to somebody I've
Yeah,
trained or go to a
yeah.
local provider or do a consult with me. But otherwise, I like when people ask me questions because it really gets me thinking. And I found the only social networking site that I don't like to really go to is Reddit because it seems like there's a lot of opinion there happening on Reddit, right? And so if I go in there and try and, inject some logic and science, it doesn't go well. So
I haven't
I
even tried Reddit. I haven't even got there.
I don't know.
I
So if
stuck to
anyone
my.
is listening to this and they're on Reddit, just,
Yeah.
tell people to like go over to my other platforms like
Yeah.
Instagram. I love TikTok, but that's a little silly. Um, and also just my my
And the
webpage
YouTube,
will
yeah.
put you
And
everywhere.
the videos are really good for deep dives. Yeah, I love YouTube and getting things out there. But it takes time and it takes a lot of work. I know it takes a lot of work to do all of this sort of media work and get it out there and get the word out and trying to
Mhm.
beat the algorithms. But yeah, it's worthwhile because you're helping people. So Dr. Janelle, thank you so much for your time today. It won't be the last time we talk, I don't think. Really nice to connect with you. So thank you very much.
It was great to be here.